Chapter 14 of Ester Ried's Namesake. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Ester Ried's Namesake by Pansy. Chapter 14. Melindy. They could not forget the night spent on the mountain. Nor could they forget Melindy's bed and Melindy. Faith, especially, seemed to be singularly attracted to the unknown girl whose poor room had sheltered them on the only night of her life when she had been conscious of need of shelter. "We ought to know Melindy," she said repeatedly to Ester. "Can't we do something for her? It is dreadful for a girl—is she young, I wonder?—to live all her days in a room like that, blessed haven of rest though it was for us. Couldn't we fix it up a little, don't you think? I wonder if she likes pictures?" "I wonder if she ever had any to like," said Ester, who, by reason of her own straitened life, was able to imagine details of poverty that astonished Faith. She looked her dismay at a condition of things that obliged one to live without pictures, and said quickly: "Then she shall have some at once; and some other things, too. What could they be, Ester, in that room? She likes ribbons, of course, bright ones; all girls do. I wish we had some idea how old she is. I wonder what colors become her. Oh, we must go and see her. Wouldn't you like to? I am just dying to see that place by daylight, and without any of the scare of our night's experience upon us. I should like to see the giants again, too, bless them! They were going to stand by us, Ester. And they would have done it, every one of them. Wasn't it funny?" She laughed gayly, but in the next instant sobered and spoke thoughtfully. "His critters! I can't forget that. Do you suppose there really is something in it? Oh, yes, you do, of course. I am always forgetting. But you can't think of me in such a connection, can you? There are times when I could wish that it might all be true." Such words made Ester miserable. It was becoming increasingly evident to her that her Faith was not of a character to touch her friend's heart or conscience. And yet she could be easily impressed, else why should what she had heard of that ignorant old man's prayer have so impressed her? The desire to see Melindy, and to learn what colored ribbons would best become her, grew upon Faith, and she planned ways and means of accomplishing it without reaching any definite conclusions, until one day she was overheard by Professor Langham, who instantly took it up. "That's a capital thought of yours, Miss Farnham. We should call upon those choice spirits again, by all means. Curiosity and interest aside, common courtesy demands it, I think. I shall not soon forget the dignity with which that old man waved me away when I tried, as a representative of the university, to remunerate him for sheltering 2 of our pupils." "Oh, did he?" said Faith gleefully. "How lovely! But we can do something for the girl, surely. I can't plan, though, until I see her. I want to drive up there next Saturday. I have been trying all the week to get Ester to believe that the earth will still revolve on its axis, and every victor of the crowd survive, even though she should leave them for another Saturday. For that matter, with a good team we could make the trip in half a day, could we not?" Mr. Langham believed that they could, and begged to be allowed to make all the arrangements, even to the driving of the horses. He did more than that. He called upon Mrs. Victor, and so represented the importance of Ester's going in person to see the women in the home that had succored her, and was so cordial and friendly in all his talk, that Mrs. Victor, who admired university people above all others, was gracious to Ester, and the second holiday was planned, with Faith Farnham and Instructor Vaughn in the back seat, and Ester and Professor Langham in front. It was Mr. Langham who suggested that since there were 4 seats it might be as well to have another man along, in case of any accident. It was true he was aware that Mr. Vaughn would rather spend the morning on the back seat beside Faith Farnham than to be anywhere else in the known world, but of that he, of course, said nothing. Melindy was a revelation. She was tall, like her father and brothers, but with a singular grace of movement, and a quiet dignity of manner that took them all by surprise, and made them feel that, despite her short skirts and bare feet and crooked grammar, they were meeting a young woman who could not be patronized, and who commanded respect. It was Faith who succeeded in penetrating the girl's reserve. She had been instantly attracted to her, having murmured to Ester, after the first glance, that she was simply superb, and added, "I am glad I brought red ribbons, they are just her color." It was Faith who begged, presently, to go to Melindy's room to rearrange her hair, while the men talked with the stalwart old man, and Ester tried to draw out the timid little woman whom these tall people called "Ma." Once alone with the girl, Faith seated herself on the patchwork quilt, and said winsomely, "Come and sit on the bed as we girls do in school, and let us have a talk. I don't think you have any idea what a wonderful bed this is. You need to lose yourself on these mountains and wander about for hours and hours, until you are in despair, and then come upon it suddenly, a shelter in the wilderness, before you will understand." The girl smiled proudly. "I reckon I couldn't git lost in these here mountains," she said. "I know every foot of 'em and love 'em all." "Have you lived here all your life? And you like it! Don't you really have any neighbors nearer than the other side of the mountain? Dear me! I should think it would be dreadful! Don't you get awfully lonesome?" The girl's keen eyes seemed to grow softer as she shook her head. "Naw, I ain't lonesome no more. I used to be, and I was sulky and cross, and all that. Ma could tell you if she wanted to jest how hateful I was. I dunno how she stood me." "And you are not so any more?" The girl shook her head again. "What made the difference?" A rare smile broke over her expressive face as she said, "I got religion." Faith looked her bewilderment. "I don't understand what that means," she said. "Won't you tell me?" The keen gray eyes seemed to search her face, and then Melindy asked a question. "Have you got religion?" "Oh, no, no, indeed! I don't even know what you mean." The girl turned her eyes away toward the mountains for a moment, then said quietly, "Then I reckon you wouldn't know anything about it. You see, you've got to get it before you can understand." "She talked of it precisely as she would of the measles, as though it was something to be caught," Faith said, with a burst of laughter, when she was trying to repeat the conversation to Ester. "And yet, do you know, in spite of the ridiculousness of the whole thing, I couldn't help feeling more as though there might be something in it than I ever did in my life before." With Melindy she persisted in trying to understand. "But tell me, do you mean that there was a time, a particular day, when you suddenly became a different girl?" Melindy's expressive head nodded again. "I got religion, you know," she said in response to Faith's puzzled look. "How did you get it?" And now it was Melindy's turn to look puzzled. She turned her eyes again in the direction of the mountains, as though she was accustomed to their help, and was silent for some minutes. At last she said, "I don't know how to tell it so you would understand. I reckon it's just as I said. You've got to get it, and then you'll know. It was Him did it, but I don't know how." The tone was so reverent that it explained the pronoun. But Faith wanted to probe further. "Who did it?" she persisted. "Why, Him! The Saviour, you know. I couldn't explain what He did, of course, but I know it's so." Here was deliberate conviction! Faith regarded the girl with curiously deepening interest, and was resolved to question further. Evidently nothing was to be got from Melindy without constant questioning. "Your father thinks just as you do, doesn't he?" Melindy nodded. "They all do," she said. "They've all got it." The tone now was one of exultation. "Jed was the last, and I was awful worried about him. He wouldn't talk, nor let any of us talk to him, not even me. And him and me has always been great friends. And he wouldn't stay in when paw prayed, and it made him mad to have paw and ma and me walk to the schoolhouse down in the valley to meetin's. He said paw oughtn't to let us, and that it was killin' ma; but it wasn't, she got better every day, and at last Jed come around." Faith remembered that Jed was the young giant who was even taller than his father. "What made him?" she asked, but that recalled Melindy's puzzled look. "I declare to goodness," she said, earnestly, "I don't know how to tell it any more than I have. It's just like it was with me. The Lord got a holt of him, and he got religion." "Was it your father's prayers that made you think about such things at first?" Melindy shook her head and laughed. La, no, it wasn't. The last thing I ever thought of was hearing Pa pray. You see, he was one of them men who didn't believe nothin'. There's a right smart lot of 'em round here. Don't seem as if ever Pa could have been such a fool as that, does it? But he was. He went as fur as any of 'em, and didn't even believe there was any God. And had mountains all around him, too. Wasn't that queer? Ma used to cry over it. She was brought up different, Ma was. She used to live away back East, and go to Sunday school when she was a little girl. She tried lots of times to tell us young ones about it, but la, we wouldn't learn. Every last one of us took after Pa. And at last, Ma gave up talkin', but she didn't ever give up the prayin'. And I s'pose that was what fetched us. My, but Ma was glad. That first night when Pa come home from meetin', and got down on his knees and prayed out loud, Ma burst right out cryin', and she says, 'Now I'm ready to go to heaven right away, I'm too happy to live any longer.' And Pa, he says, 'Sho, Mother! You can't go to heaven yet. You've got 3 boys to look after.'" "And a girl," said Faith gently. "Didn't he count you in?" "No, he didn't, not that time. Pa generally counts me in too, but I reckon he knew then that the Lord was lookin' after me all right. But the boys, you see, hadn't none of them got it yet." "What was it that made your father change his mind?" A beautiful soft light illumined Melindy's entire face, and her voice became exultant. "Pa told them at the meetin' that when he saw the change there was in his girl, he knew that somethin' had got a holt of her that he didn't know nothin' about, and he wanted to find out what it was." "And it has lasted?" "Oh, yes, it'll last, just as much as these mountains will." "What makes you sure? When was it?" "That I got religion, do you mean? Why, it was 5 years ago, most. I was pretty nigh 15. And it took Pa 2 whole years after that. And Jed didn't get it till last winter. We was dreadful troubled over Jed. But now we've all got it. And I know it'll last, 'cause he said so. And we are that happy that it seems as though we couldn't stand no more." Never in her most joyful moments had Faith Farnham felt such assurance and exultation as throbbed in Melindy's face and voice at this word. Yet she lived in a mountain forest, a mile from the trail, and in a 2-roomed hut without windows! It was a memorable visit. While they were still in Melindy's room, Faith brought out the pictures that were to adorn the walls. They were choice prints, several of them humorous, but there were 2 Madonnas, and a copy of "Christ and the Fishermen." Melindy studied each with interest, and said, with a grace that the donor had not expected, that she should "admire" to pin them up on her walls; that she was fixing up her room a good deal, as she got time, and these would help "amazing." She glanced proudly at the gay quilt and the broken-nosed pitcher as she spoke. The pitcher was at that moment gay with poppies. Over the Madonnas she laughed with delight, and said that she "just loved" babies. But a look of awe came into her face when she was told who the child was. She stopped talking, and gazed as though she wanted to transfer the picture to her memory. "Just to think," she said softly, "that he was willin' to be a little baby and be toted around like other babies. I wisht I could a carried him." Never was longing for privilege more tenderly expressed. But over the picture of "Christ and the Fishermen" she bent silent and absorbed. She recognized the central figure at the first glance. "That's him!" she said breathlessly, and then bent her head. When she raised it her fine gray eyes were dim with tears. "I never expected to have a picture of him," she said. "And to think that I've got 3! I'll tell you what I'd love to do, if you don't mind. I'd love to put this and one of them," nodding her head toward the Madonnas, "out in the other room, so that Ma and Pa and Jed and all of 'em can see him. Pa, he will like this one wonderful; and Ma will just dote on the little baby; and we can see him all the time we are eatin', and when we are readin' about him and prayin' to him. Won't it be beautiful?" The girl is simply wonderful. They were on the homeward drive, and Faith had been eagerly repicturing for them the scenes in Melindy's room. She broke off suddenly to make this exclamation, and added earnestly: "I should like to understand it. Do any of you? What is it that has made the change in her life? Professor Langham, you are a Bible teacher and ought to be able to explain these mysteries. What has happened to these rude people, which seems to have transformed them?" Mr. Langham made a smiling answer. "The girl seems to have explained it in a most expressive phrase. They have all got religion. Doesn't that account for it?" "Not to me. What is religion, and how came they to get it? And why are they so exultant over it? I never heard any one else pray like that old man. Is it because they are ignorant and in poverty that it means so much to them? If it is, one could almost wish to share their ignorance in order to share such joy." "Ignorance has nothing to do with it," said Ester sharply. She was thinking of her father and mother. "Well, then, I wish somebody could explain it. They certainly talk and feel about religion as no other people do with whom I come in contact. And yet it is much as one would think people would feel and talk if there was anything in it. That old mother used an old fashioned word that my nurse did when I was a child. She told me that since her Jed had 'got converted' it didn't seem as though she had anything left to wish for. Do educated people believe in that word 'conversion,' Professor Langham?" Chapter 15 Recording by Tricia G.